الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الحدي حدي محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. After praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sending immense greetings and salutations upon the final Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, who was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يُخْرِجُهُم مِّنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ, to bring the people out of the realms of darknesses to the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the opposite factor that exists upon this earth, that wherever there is dhulm, oppression, there will be the nur, the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wherever there is iman, there will unfortunately also exist al-kufr, disbelief as well. Wherever there happens to be the call of the sunnah, there will be unfortunately the call of al-bid'ah as well. This is the concept of zawjiyah in terms of aqa'id, in partners or pairs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed upon this earth. Likewise around us, the heavens and the earth, the sun and the moon, all of this concept of zawjiyah. وَفِي كُلِّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. In everything we've created pairs, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, that you may pay heed and reflect and ponder over this. These are the pairs around us that we find, and also the pairs of the human beings and the animals, the male and the female gender that we find. And also we find in the unseen world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a concept of the pairs as well. The pairs inside the unseen world would be al-jannatu haqq wan-naru haqq. Indeed, paradise is a reality, is the truth. And likewise, the hellfire is a reality as well. These are the two pairs inside the akhirah. The only distinction here that we find inside the akhirah, it will be a choice of one of these two destinations. Also at the same time, it should be highlighted that there may be some Muslims who decide to be placed or are placed unfortunately inside the hellfire of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those who have that belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will eventually come out of the hellfire and go into paradise. But that is not a choice that obviously any sensible Muslim wants to make, to believe that for some short while I will enter myself into the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then come out and enter into paradise. So this choice that we all have to make, obviously firstly upon this dunya. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us all the tawfiq and the ability and the responsibility to make the choice regarding our actions. On a daily basis that we find every single Muslim, rather every single individual makes a choice about what they want to do. But it's very strange that when it comes to the akhirah, when it comes to the journey towards paradise or the unfortunate journey towards the hellfire, people begin to highlight that this has been destined for me, or this is something which has been programmed initially within myself, which is partially true but not the total truth. Because upon this dunya that we find as a human being, we make the choice. If a person tells us that there are obstacles upon the path in entering into this masjid and to take a different route, every single sensible individual would not take the route, will find the opposite route to find a way of security and peace to enter into the masjid. Only a foolish individual will decide to take the route which has been told there are obstacles, there are deterrents upon the path, there are hindrances upon the path if you follow this entrance into the masjid. A sensible individual will take another path. So how comes when it comes towards the akhirah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us that this is a path of obstacles, this is a path of dangers, this is a path of hindrances, this is a path that will take away your faith, yet we still begin to travel upon that path and say this has been destined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't follow that methodology upon this earth in our worldly affairs, but we're quick to accuse or unfortunately blame Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has destined me to follow this evil path. The human being has been given that opportunity to recognize or to make the choice of which path to follow. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْنِ وَلِسَانًا وَشَفَتَيْنِ وَهَدَيْنَاهُ نَجْدَيْنِ. Have we not given you, أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْنِ, placed for you 2 eyes for you to see, to visualize, etc. Have we not given you 2 lips to speak with and given you a tongue to express yourself? So just like we have these abilities, these faculties, that we recognize them and we use them appropriately. So likewise, وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ, we have guided you to the 2 paths. We've shown you the 2 paths. The path, طريق الخير, the path of goodness, وطريق الشر, the path of evil. The choice is now up to the human being to decide which path do I want to follow upon. Which path do I want to follow? Which type of life do I want to endeavor or follow inside my life? Likewise, you find, إِنَّا هَدَيْنَاهُ السَّبِيلِ إِمَّا شَاكِرًا وَإِمَّا كَفُورًا. إِنَّا هَدَيْنَاهُ السَّبِيلِ. Indeed, we have guided the human being to the sabil, to the path. إِمَّا شَاكِرًا. Either individual will become grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the person begins to recognize that these are the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the appropriate path to follow, or وَإِمَّا كَفُورًا, or the individual becomes ungrateful. And that is a large portion of human beings, unfortunately, and sadly as well amongst some Muslims, that the path of disobedience, the path of ingratitude, the path of rejection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that many or some Muslims don't want to follow. Likewise, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created once again the pairs. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَى وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا تَجَلَّى وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنْثَى إِنَّ سَعْيَكُمْ لَشَتَّى. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the night which covers, which enshrouds, the day which comes out. Likewise, we've created the male and the female. And then comes إِنَّ سَعْيَكُمْ لَشَتَّى. But unfortunately, every individual is going at different degrees, different angles, variances. Everybody has a different path that they're following. If just the night is clear, the day is clear, human beings are clear. But when it comes to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it seems to be not very clear. People are going towards different directions. Man will only have وَلَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى وَأَنَّ سَعْيَهُ سَوْفَ يُرَى. Man will only have that which he strives for. The person who strives for the akhirah, strives for paradise, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will return that individual with that reward of paradise. Yes, it's true inside the hadith that none of you, your actions will enter you into paradise. Not even you, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is right, exactly, that's right. Not even myself, except for that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala covers and enshrouds me with His mercy. But here we find that ulama of hadith have highlighted, does not mean that the person does not follow a path of action. The one meaning interpretation of this hadith is that our actions that we do upon this dunya are minimal, because what we are given in return is far more vast. That if we try to barter our actions for paradise, then obviously there is no way that we can barter our meagerly actions in this dunya and say, I deserve paradise. That's one interpretation of this hadith that we find, which is clearly plausible. If any Muslim thinks that of their 50 years of service, of ibadah, of good deeds, that can be exchanged for the immense reward that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us in return, then they've fallen short. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, أَعْدَدْتُ لِعِبَادِ الصَّالِحِينَ inside hadith Qudsi, مَا لَا عَيْنٌ رَأَتْ وَلَا عُذُنٌ سَمِعَتْ وَلَا خَطَرَ عَلَى قَلْبِ بَشَرٍ. Indeed, I have prepared for my servants what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and the feeling, the perception not come upon the heart or the mind of any human being. And then the Messenger recited, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the ayah from the Quran, that no soul knows what delights have been hidden for that individual inside paradise. This is what? Jaza'an bima kanu ya'malun. This is the recompense, the reward of what the actions they used to do upon this dunya. So should be quite clear that striving that we need to do is striving towards the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in making that choice upon this dunya, to exert our efforts to find the appropriate path, to find the swiftest path upon this dunya, to come as closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thus we find that the delights of paradise have been touched upon many occasions, about what are the blessings of paradise, or the na'im, the good things that will be given to the people inside paradise. At the same time, we should also become individuals in following the concept of pairs, the journey towards Jahannam, towards the hellfire created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the fine balance that we find inside the Quran. Al-ayat bayna targhibi wa tarhib. Ayat of the Quran between encouraging us and telling us to stay away from certain things. Ayatul zajr, ayat of adab, ayat talking about punishment, about the torture, the enragement that will begin to take place inside the akhirah. So the Muslim at times needs to follow that path of reading about the fearful affairs, the fearful issues, to remind themselves, وَذَكِّرْهُمْ بِأَيَّامِ اللَّهِ, remind them about the days of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, you find the final ayah inside the Quran, as mentioned by Imam Suyuti, many ulama of ulum al-Quran, in his al-itqan fi ulum al-Quran, وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ ثُمَّ تُوَفَّى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَا كَسَبَتْ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Fear that day that you're going to return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and no soul will be oppressed regarding what it done upon this earth. That is going to be taking place upon every single individual. So all of us need to remember the fearful issue of returning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and likewise to begin to study Jahannam. And obviously it sounds very strange. How can a person begin to study Jahannam? Just like that we know that we begin to study paradise, وَمَا يُقَرِّبُ إِلَيْهَا, whatever brings us closer to paradise. Likewise, we need to study Jahannam and try to what brings us away from Jahannam. And thus you find عَرَفْتُ الشَّرَّ لَا لِلشَّرِّ وَلَكِنْ لِتَلَافِيهِ. I studied evil, or that which was bad, not for the sake of studying it. I study it to be able to understand, to stay away from it. Whoever does not know the difference between good and evil, جَدِيرٌ أَنْ يَقَعَ فِيهِ, will one day eventually fall into the evil. So that's why some Muslims, they may only know something which is good. Doesn't mean you have to practice evil. Don't study the opposite. As we began with, without any kufr, we would not really appreciate iman. That's what the ulama mentioned, that through opposites, the haqq, the apparent, is made visible. If there was not the opposite, we will not be able to recognize the truth at times. So we have to, as Muslims, and inshallah as believers, begin to understand the opposite of what will be given to us if we begin to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all of this is based upon numerous ayat inside the Quran, as we find, Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu inna arsalnaka shahidan wa mubashiran wa nadhira. O Prophet of Allah, indeed we have sent you as one who is a witness and giving people glad tidings, and at the same time warning humanity. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا كَافَّةً لِلنَّاسِ بَشِيرًا وَنَذِيرًا وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. We not send you except for one who warns mankind and gives them the glad tiding. But indeed most of mankind are unaware regarding this warning or the coming of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you find that his journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or his journey to try to avoid the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we find. We find inside the Quran explicitly highlighting the journey of the individual to try to avoid Jahannam, as we find, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara wa quduha an-nasu wal hijara 'alayha malaikatun ghilaz. Oh, you believe, save yourselves. Qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara. Oh, you believe, save yourselves and your family members from the hellfire, whose fuel is men and stones. عليها ملائكة غلاظ شداد لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون. Upon it are stern, harsh angels who are guarding over Jahannam, who never ever disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and carry out the commandments that they've been told to do. Likewise, we find if the individual who does not begin to save themselves from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, قُلْ إِنَّ الْخَاسِرِينَ الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُم. Indeed, those individuals in a state of manifest loss, who've lost themselves, and totally lost themselves, وَأَهْلِيهِمْ, and their family members, يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَلَا ذَلِكَ وَالْخُسْرَانُ الْمُبِينَ. Those are the individuals that you lose yourself, you lose your family members, and you enter into that punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That will be the ultimate loss, that we have not focused upon ourselves and our family members. Especially in today's climate environment, at times, not to say that we should not become politically active, etc., but sometimes people become too politically active and forget that their role, that the main journey is to save oneself from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَمَنْ زُحْزِحَ عَنِ النَّارِ وَأُدْخِلَ الْجَنَّةَ فَقَدْ فَازَ وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاءُ الْغُرُورِ. Whoever saves himself from the hellfire and be thrown into paradise, فَقَدْ فَازَ, that individual is the most successful individual. وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاءُ الْغُرُورِ. What is this world except for a great big deception? Likewise, amongst the sifat of Ibadur Rahman, the characteristics of the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, towards the end of Surah Al-Furqan, the 25th chapter of the Quran, you find the final 18 or 19 odd ayat that we find talking about the characteristics of the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. Servants of Ar-Rahman, servants of the worshipper who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala appropriately, walk upon this land in a state of humility, of humbleness. وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. If the ignorant individuals, they disturb them or they make a mockery out of them, they make comments towards them, قَالُوا سَلَامًا. They say, you need peace, and they walk away from them. But that which concerns us in these final ayat, وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا اصْرِفْ عَنَّا عَذَابَ جَهَنَّمَ إِنَّ عَذَابَهَا كَانَ غَرَامًا إِنَّهَا سَاءَتْ مُسْتَقَرًّا وَمُقَامًا. This is amongst the supplications of Ibadur Rahman. There are those individuals saying, رَبَّنَا اصْرِفْ عَنَّا عَذَابَ جَهَنَّمَ. Oh our Lord, take us away, drift us away from the punishment of Jahannam. إِنَّ عَذَابَهَا كَانَ غَرَامًا. Indeed, this punishment is a permanent punishment, inseparable punishment. Whoever enters the Jahannam, إِنَّهَا سَاءَتْ مُسْتَقَرًّا وَمُقَامًا. Indeed, this is an evil abode and a resting place. In another location, you find the way of the believers addressing the characteristics. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ مِنْ عَذَابِ رَبِّهِمْ مُشْفِقُونَ إِنَّ عَذَابَ رَبِّهِمْ غَيْرُ مَأْمُونَ. The believers are those individuals who are fear the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Indeed, the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a thing to feel secure from or to become relentless. A Muslim is always vigilant that they could be facing the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thus you find also amongst their prayers, رَبَّنَا إِنَّكَ مَن تُدْخِلِ النَّارِ فَقَدْ أَخْزَيْتَهُ وَمَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ مِنْ أَنصَارٍ. Our Lord, whoever إِنَّكَ مَن تُدْخِلِ النَّارِ فَقَدْ أَخْزَيْتَهُ. Whoever you throw into Jahannam, into the fire, you have disgraced that individual. There is disgrace upon that individual who's been entered into the fire of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So thus we find that a Muslim goes back to study those ayat talking about the Jahannam, talking about the hellfire of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prepared. وَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي أُعِدَّتْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ. Fear that fire which has been prepared for لِلْكَافِرِينَ, for the disbelieving individuals. إِنَّ جَهَنَّمَ كَانَتْ مِرْصَادًا لِلطَّاغِينَ مَآبًا. Indeed, Jahannam is a place which is hell, is a place lying in wait, a destination for those people who have transgressed. These ayat, ulama have highlighted, prove the existence that Jahannam already exists. It is amongst the deviant views of the Mu'tazila, etc., who believe that Jahannam and paradise, al-Jannah, will be created on the Day of Judgment. Whereas the creed of Ahl Sunnah highlights to the point that Jannah and Jahannam has already been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And likewise, you find many of the ahadith which mention when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Jannah and Jahannam and told Jibreel alayhi salam to go and look at these two destinations. Hadith in Sahih Muslim in Kitab al-Jannah wa sifatu na'imiha wa ahliha, the book of paradise and the description of people of paradise, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created it. And here the ulama once again highlight that Jannah and Jahannam has already been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There was a dispute between Jannah and Nar. Once again, another proof that paradise and the hellfire has already been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inside the Jahannam we find every haughty and proud individual. Inside paradise, every meek and humble individual. These are the general sifat of the people of Jahannam. Those who are haughty, those who are full of pride, those who are full of arrogance, those who become affluent, those who become rich. These become their general characteristics. Doesn't mean this is a general. There are going to be at times exceptions, that a person can break those exceptions. But that's the general rule, and you can begin to visualize at times, unfortunately, those characteristics even amongst our own Muslims. So we find that those individuals who want to reject the concept of Jannah and Jahannam and believe it's a figment of the mind, those individuals amongst the philosophers and some Muslim thinkers who believe these are figments of the mind, these are only an external factor that people invented to scare people to not return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, the Quran uses various different names talking about Jahannam or talking about the final abode or the resting place of certain individuals. Amongst them, the ulama have collected them from various ayat of the Quran. Amongst the names of Jahannam that we find, Inna Jahannama kanat mirsada. First name being Yani Jahannam. Indeed, Jahannam, truly Jahannam is lying Yani in wait for these individuals. The second time that we find, or second name that we find, Kalla innaha ladha nazza'at lishawa. Indeed, Yani ladha is by no means, ladha will be something which burns away right into the skull, is another name Yani of hellfire. كلا لينبذن في الحطمة وما أدراك ما الحطمة نار الله الموقدة التي تطلع على الأفئدة. So al-hutama, the one Yani that crushes the individual, the crushing fire is another name of this Yani end result of the certain Yani individuals. Likewise, you find فريق في الجنة وفريق في السعير. There will be a people, Yani a group of people inside Jannah, inside paradise. And there will be وَفَرِيقٌ فِي السَّعِيرِ, and there will be a people who will be in as-sa'ir, is the fourth name Yani of Yani Jahannam. Another name that we find, سَأُصْلِيهِ سَقَرْ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا سَقَرْ لَا تُبْقِي وَلَا تَذَرْ لَوَّاحَةٌ لِلْبَشَرِ. We will throw the individual into Saqar. What will explain to you what Saqar is? Saqar is another name of Jahannam. لَا تُبْقِي وَلَا تَذَرْ. It permits nothing to endure and leaves nothing alone, لَوَّاحَةٌ لِلْبَشَرِ, and will actually change the color Yani of man. And thus you find that the hellfire was burned, kindled for 1,000 years, and another 1,000 years, till another 1,000 years, till it becomes totally black, as Ibn Abbas has mentioned in some narrations. وَبُرِّزَتِ الْجَحِيمُ لِلْغَاوِينَ. Al-Jahim is the sixth name that we find that will be brought before those individuals who are straying Yani in evil. The seventh name that we find, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَفَّتْ مَوَازِينُهُ فَأُمُّهُ هَاوِيَةٌ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا هِيَ نَارٌ حَامِيَةٌ. We find Hawiyah, Yani the bottomless pit. The pit which Yani has no ending is another Yani name Yani of Jahannam that the ulama have collected. Some of the people in some of their writings they begin to highlight these are the various stages of Jahannam, the 7 stages of Jahannam. ثُمَّ لَظَى ثُمَّ حُطَمَ ثُمَّ سَعِيرٌ ثُمَّ سَقَرٌ ثُمَّ الْجَحِيمُ ثُمَّ هَاوِيَةٌ, the bottom part. But these divisions have no authentic evidence from the Quran or from the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are just random names that we mention, and this is just an extreme extraction that some people have begun to make. Yani that these are the different stages of Jahannam, just like you find various stages Yani of Yani paradise. As for the location of Jahannam, the people begin to say, is it underneath the earth at the moment because of the burning volcanoes, etc.? Is it in the heavens, or should a person Yani refrain? The best stance to take is the person, al-ilmu inda Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as Imam Suyuti mentions, that person should refrain from highlighting where is the exact location Yani of Yani Jahannam. Wal-ilmu, the knowledge belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as the person begins to get closer to the gates Yani of Jahannam, even before the person visualizes Jahannam, you find certain sparks begin to come out of Jahannam. As the Quran mentions, إِنَّهَا تَرْمِي بِشَرَرٍ كَالْقَصَرِ كَأَنَّهُ جِمَالَةٌ صُفْرٌ. You find that great big huge sparks begin to start coming out of Jahannam. And the size of these sparks is the size Yani of Yani yellow camels. You can imagine the size of a camel is a size of a spark which comes out of Jahannam, spitting out the sparks, just like we find when wood is burning. Wallahu a'lam. Then when the individual comes even closer towards the gates of Jahannam, you find وَإِنَّ جَهَنَّمَ لَمَوْعِدُهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ لَهَا سَبْعَةُ أَبْوَابٍ. Indeed, the end place of these individuals will be Jahannam. Jahannam has 7 doors, 7 gates. لِكُلِّ بَابٍ مِّنْهُمْ جُزْءٌ مَقْسُومٌ. And every single door, every single quarter will have its due share of people who will enter into via that exit into Jahannam. Once again, ulama begin to discuss, you look in Tafsir Ibn Kathir, about this various sections that Iblis will come through this section and so disbelievers come through this section. This is the way they will be entered via their own doors into Yani Jahannam. Others begin to highlight that the stages will be one above the other, And once one is filled, then the second, the next one will be filled as well. When they arrive at the gates of Jahannam, we find inside Surah Zumar that we find the 39th chapter of Quran, وَسِيقَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِلَى جَهَنَّمَ زُمَرًا. You find when the disbelievers are dragged in groups in front of Jahannam, حَتَّى إِذَا جَاءُوهَا فُتِحَتْ أَبْوَابُهَا. You find that its doors futihat. Its doors futihat will be open for them. Here you find, look at these ayat in discussion of the people of Jahannam and the discussion of the people of paradise. The distinction that's only made is between the letter fa and wa. When it comes to the believers, it's highlighted wa futihat abwabuha. When the believers come towards paradise, wa futihat, and the doors of paradise will be open for them. As for the people of Jahannam, mentions futihat, yani bima'na fa al-fawriya. Immediately there's going to be no respect that's going to be shown towards disbelievers. Doors will be flung open and they'll be thrown into Jahannam. Whereas wa carries the meaning that there'll be a small pause. That when you meet somebody that you love and you greet a certain individual, you pause and you greet them. You make istiqbal upon them and give them certain words. And then you open the door and let them come into your home or give them the gift that you want to present to them. This is just a distinction of the letter harf wa and fa between disbelievers and believers. For the kuffar, for the disbelievers, there will be no istiqbaliyah for them. There will be no meeting, no greeting for them. The doors will just be flung open and these individuals will just be thrown into Jahannam. وَقَالَ لَهُمْ خَزَنَتُهَا أَلَمْ يَأْتِكُمْ رُسُلٌ مِّنْكُمْ يَتْلُونَ عَلَيْكُمْ آيَاتِنَا آيَاتِ رَبِّكُمْ وَيُنذِرُونَكُمْ لِقَاءَ رَبِّكُمْ هَذَا يَوْمِكُمْ هَذَا قَالُوا بَلَى وَلَكِنْ حَقَّتْ كَلِمَةُ الْعَذَابِ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ. We said regarding these individuals, وَسِيقَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِلَى جَهَنَّمْ. These disbelievers will be brought, dragged towards Jahannam in groups. And then Jahannam, the doors will be open for them. And once they're flung into Jahannam, we said to these individuals, وَقَالَ لَهُمْ يعني خَزَنَتُهَا. The keepers of Jahannam will say to these individuals, أَلَمْ يَأْتِكُمْ رُسُلٌ مِّنْكُمْ. Did there not come a messenger from amongst your own selves? يَتْلُونَ عَلَيْكُمْ آيَاتِ رَبِّكُمْ. You used to recite the signs or the verses of Allah, your Lord, upon you. وَيُنذِرُونَكُمْ. And used to warn you. And thus you find, that's all that our task is. A Muslim's task is to warn oneself and to warn other individuals to deter them away from this punishment. وَيُنذِرُونَكُمْ لِقَاءَ يَوْمِكُمْ هَذَا. I'm warning you about this meeting in front of your Lord today. قَالُوا بَلَى. They affirmed, indeed we affirm to this. They did come to us to warn us, but what happened? وَلَكِنْ حَقَّتْ كَلِمَةُ الْعَذَابِ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ. But we are people who turned away. We rejected. So thus you find the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to fall true upon the people who lie, the people who reject. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not be unfair to any individual. People who turn away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will turn away from them. Those individuals, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا وَنَحْشُرُهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَعْمَى قَالَ رَبِّ لِمَا حَشَرْتَنِي أَعْمَى وَقَدْ كُنْتُ بَصِيرًا قَالَ كَذَلِكَ أَتَتْكَ آيَاتُنَا فَنَسِيتَهَا وَكَذَلِكَ الْيَوْمَ تُنْسَى. That day will be said to those individuals, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي. Whoever turns away from our remembrance, remembering me, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those individuals will have فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا. They will have a restricted life upon this dunya. Sunnatullahi ala al-ard. That is the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon this earth. You turn away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will have a restricted life. A very limited life. A life of difficulties. People may perceive it's a life of goodness upon this earth. There will be dhiq fi sudurihim. Restrictions, restraints within their hearts. Bad feelings within their hearts. No contentment inside this dunya. And even more so inside the akhirah towards these individuals. Some of these individuals will say, oh my Lord, Lima, why did you raise me up in a state of blindness? وَقَدْ كُنْتُ بَصِيرًا. I had the ability to see inside this earth or upon this earth. Because why? When you were given the signs by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you turned away from them. You rejected the signs. وَكَذَلِكَ الْيَوْمَ تُنْسَى. And thus today, you are forgotten by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise you find, or you believe, or individuals, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ. Oh, you believe individuals, don't become like those individuals who forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes them forget their own selves.
So we find that even after being admitted or being placed inside Jahannam, that we find قِيلَ دُخُلُوا أَبْوَابَ جَهَنَّمَ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا فَبِئْسَ مَثْوَى الْمُتَكَبِّرِينَ. These individuals, قِيلَ دُخُلُوا أَبْوَابَ جَهَنَّمَ, be said to them, enter into the doors of Jahannam, خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا, residing inside Jahannam. فَبِئْسَ مَثْوَى الْمُتَكَبِّرِينَ. What an evil refuge it will be for people, for the arrogant individuals. The biggest form of arrogance that we find is rejection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that a person does not submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the ultimate arrogance that we find in the disbelievers. And yunkirun Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they reject Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, don't recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, don't submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or attribute the blessings that they have to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this unfortunately is becoming visible among some of us Muslims as well, that we are becoming ungrateful towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are rejecting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and some of us, we feel that possibly we are scot free, that there will be no punishment for us just being Muslims will save us from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, being Muslims will possibly save you from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but at the same time being Muslims could also expose you to the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not that any of us aspire for any Muslim to be punished or to be tortured, but that is unfortunately a sad reality, that some of us may be punished, may be tortured for the disbelief or the rejection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our lives. Likewise, you find other verses highlighting indirectly the gates of hell or the gates of Jahannam. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِآيَاتِنَا هُمْ أَصْحَابُ الْمَشْأَمَةِ عَلَيْهِمْ نَارٌ مُؤْصَدَةٌ. Those individuals, the unhappy companions of the left hand. And these individuals, find on them will be the fire which is vaulted over them all around. That's you find Ibn Abbas mentions mu'sadatun is the gates will be locked. So this is a sign that these are the gates of Jahannam, that once they enter into Jahannam, the gates will be sealed behind these individuals. وَقَالَ مُجَاهِدٌ مُعْصَدَةٌ, in the dialect of the Quraysh that we find, it means to be locked or to be shut. So this word mu'sadatun, Ibn Kathir in his tafsir he mentioned, shows that these are the gates of Jahannam that will be sealed behind them. In other ayat that we find, إِنَّهَا عَلَيْهِمْ مُعْصَدَةٌ فِي عَمَدٍ مُمَدَّدَةٍ, that you find these individuals will be vaulted in columns outstretched, and then the bolts will be placed upon them. And some of the ulama, Ibn Rajab begins to highlight the reason for the bolts to be placed outside of Jahannam. It will intensify the heat, that when you are trapped inside something, a burning heat, and you're trapped within it, the heat will begin to intensify upon the individual. And we know to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala belongs the greatest example, but you can imagine inside this dunya being trapped in an environment, there's no way out, no way for you to come out, and there's heat, there's a fire inside that area. How that heat will begin to intensify if there's no escape for that heat to come out of that area. So an individual, he will be trapped inside that Jahannam. The gates will be sealed, the bolts will be placed upon them. All of this that ulama have collected of the journey through Jahannam, to warn the individual, to make them to understand the reality that some people inside Jahannam, that how many times that you find they will be, as the Quran mentions, that they will be roasted inside Jahannam, and every time their skins are burnt, that you find they will be placed with fresh skins to face the punishment once again. And as you find, even scientifically it's been proven, the reason for the skins is it feels the pain. Once the skin has been taken off and it's only the flesh, the body no longer feels the pain. These are all ayat inside the Quran warning the individual to become wary about their journey. And unfortunately many of us individuals begin to slip, or we begin to err, and we begin to lose that focus towards the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thus we find وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Remind, indeed, the reminder benefits the believers. And thus you find the maw'ibah, the admonition, according to hadith of Ibad ibn Sariyah, that we find that the Prophet Muhammad gave us a strong admonition, a strong warning. وَجِلَتْ مِنْهَا الْقُلُوبُ وَضَرَفَتْ مِنْهَا الْعُيُونَ, that the hearts begin to quiver and the eyes began to shed tears. That this is the way of the believer, that there is a technical study of Islam, but at the same time there has to be the maw'ibah, the strong admonition, the strong reminder that we need to give to all of ourselves, that the concept of spirituality is the key element of a Muslim. That if our studying of Islam, studying of Jannah, studying of Jahannam, studying of Iman is not taking us closer to Jannah, is not drifting us away from Jahannam, is not taking us towards good deeds and drifting us away from bad deeds, then all of this, may excuse the expression, may be a waste of our time, may be a waste of our life. That's what it possibly could be. Because the intelligent individual is the one who benefits from the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ. The intelligent one is the one who hear, ponder and reflect over the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ. And they follow the best of their ability. Likewise you find, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك فقنا عذاب النار. Indeed, the creation, the night and the day, the heavens and the earth, are signs for men of understanding. What do intelligent individuals do when they visualize this? They say, ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا. Our Lord, you haven't created this in vanity. They are standing, they are bowing, they are prostrating. They reflect over all of this. There must be a purpose what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. And subhanak, glorified are you, and save us from what? The punishment of the hellfire. That is the intelligent individual that all throughout their life of studying the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, trying to avoid to enter into the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if it means that there may be a disliking from the people. People around you may dislike in you. We even sometimes parents may dislike in you. Muslims may dislike in you. But if you are trying to earn the pleasure and the happiness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and trying to avoid the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that is truly a path of success. Likewise, a person begins to read about the bodily form of the people inside Jahannam, you find that their bodily size will be increased. And the ulama mentioned the reason for the increase of their bodily size is that they may face the punishment, feel the punishment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed for these individuals. And thus you find the size of the bodies and mentions on many hadith in Sahih Muslim, and the texture, the thickness of their skin, etc. And likewise you find the characteristics of the people of Jahannam. Likewise you look at Surah Al-A'raf, the 7th chapter of the Quran, talking about the upper heights, the lofty levels, is the main theme. The crux of the surah, the 7th chapter of the Quran, is all about the people of Jannah and Jahannam. That the people of Jahannam are calling out to who? The people of Jannah, to send down what? Some food and drink upon them. What will be the food and the drink of the people of Jahannam? Their own pus, their own sweat, their own blood, their own bodily parts. That will be their ta'am, that will be their food, that will be their drink that will be given to them. Drink that will rip open their intestines. Where the drink of the people of paradise, the 4 beautiful rivers will be given to them. And likewise some ulama have collected 4 rivers inside of 4 types of drink in Jahannam will be given to the people inside Jahannam. Their food and their drink, their clothing, what type of clothing will they wear? Will be nothing but burning garments will be given to these individuals. And their places of reclining, of rest, will be all the opposite of the people of Jannah. But obviously some of us have just taken it for granted that whatever is in Jannah will be given to us directly. No, at the same time we mentioned we need to study the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and study that which could be the ending of many, or if not all of the disbelievers. Because as far as the creed of Ahlul Sunnah is concerned, a person who doesn't make the Shahada, externally that person is classified as a disbeliever. And a large portion of the people upon the planet at the moment are just heading towards that direction. The only individuals are obviously the Muslims. And even amongst the Muslims, we begin to study the Muslims. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of the Muslims. There are a large portion of Muslims, unfortunately, who are also heading towards that direction. And obviously, as we began with, our creed is that whoever believes in La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah will eventually come out of even Jahannam. That is the creed of Ahlul Sunnah. They'll eventually come out. As for when they will come out or how they will come out, that is totally belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we as Muslims, the role of us Muslims at the end of the day is to advise ourselves and the people around us. That just like we advise them in the affairs of their dunya to make the appropriate choice, as many individuals may be finishing their school, their college, their university, their choice of work, whatever it may be, they always come and consult with individuals what is the best choice to make. That is exactly the advice that we are offering. Our advice isn't based upon our personal feelings, our personal interests. Our advice is based upon the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's all our advice is based upon. To encouraging ourselves and the rest of our respected brothers and sisters to make the choice of trying to exert our efforts to follow the path of paradise. To make that right choice that we may have a successful, a good ending upon this earth, on this earth, and likewise even more so inside the akhirah, that there is a great good blessings given to all of us Muslims, whether we are apparent Muslims, we are well-known Muslims, we are not known Muslims, we are rich Muslims, poor Muslims, whatever type of Muslims we are. But if we inside our heart that we have that burning desire to return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to exert our efforts with sincerity, wal mutaba'a, and following the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, that will be the most ultimate and the best choice, that we cannot recompense or give you anything for that choice. The only one is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who will give us that choice that we make upon this earth. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the tawfiq and ability to make the appropriate choice upon this earth, and to rejoice with that appropriate choice inside the akhirah. وَقُولُوا قَوْلِي هَذَا وَاسْتَغْفِرُوا لَي وَلَكُمْ وَلِجَمِيعِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ فَاسْتَغْفِرُوهُ إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. بارك الله فيكم.